Welcome to the Greener Way podcast, a show about people, planet, and purpose, and how investors and corporate leaders push forward in a complex world. On this episode of the Greener Way, we're speaking with the Investor Group on Climate Change Advocacy Manager, Michael Bones. IGCC has recently launched a 2-year strategy to help investors put money in investments that will help our changing world adapt to the impacts of climate change. And we're going to discuss the task ahead, what investors can do, and what it means professionally and personally to embrace the really severe negative impacts of climate change and what it means. Michael, welcome to the Greener Way. I feel like we've been talking for so many years about climate advocacy and investing, so it's a real pleasure to finally officially have this conversation on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role at IGCC? And then let's get into this adaptation strategy that you helped co-author with IGCC.
My role at the Investor Group on Climate Change is advocacy manager. So that's within the policy team. And essentially, it's taking all the good work done within the policy research and the positions that we build up in partnership with the investors who we represent. And it's putting that information in front of parliamentarians, in front of journalists, and in front of public servants and other stakeholders, showing just what it is that the investment community is asking for and needing to help accelerate not just decarbonisation, but also adaptation and building resilience to climate change.
Let's talk a little bit about this adaptation strategy that got launched at the Climate Summit in Sydney recently. What is an adaptation strategy and what are some of the key features here?
Yeah, so look, I put my hand up to run this strategy process when I joined IGCC earlier in the year. I'd done similar sort of strategic processes at other organisations.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't quite ready for the journey that I was going to go on, but it's always a good way to learn. I guess in my career, I've been mostly focused on overcoming the hurdles that are blocking just sort of the basic things we need to do, like get more renewable energy in and reduce emissions from fossil fuels.
Mm.
So this was an opportunity to turn my mind more towards the fact that there is a certain amount of warming that's already locked in, that is going to have negative impacts in terms of fires, floods on our communities, on our natural environment, on infrastructure, and to really explore, okay, what is it that we need to do to properly prepare for that which we know is coming, and how do we help investors leverage more money into those solutions? So at a high level, a lot of money is spent on disaster recovery, but not enough on disaster preparedness or developing systems that are better able to cope with rapid flooding, increased fires, that sort of thing. So the strategy process was really taking a bit of a systemic look at all of those issues and figuring out what sort of goals investors should be going for and what objectives we should really have to rapidly adapt to the changing climate and to start building in more resilience to the system.
It feels like this strategy, it's a strategy whose time has come, but I think at this particular moment, as we're entering sort of the Australian spring of 2023 with an El Nino effect coming on, it feels in the air that there's this feeling of we're bracing for something not great to happen in the coming months. So there's sort of a really interesting sort of emotional pull to the moment of launching this strategy as well, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So let's get into it. What are the key features about this strategy and what can investors do per this strategy to move around the barriers to investing in an adaptation?
Yeah, so I guess we'll start with the vision or the end goal, the target outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that investors are managing climate change's physical risks by driving urgent economy-wide adaptation and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Our members at Investor Group on Climate Change are what's called universal owners. They're big super funds, primarily asset owners and managers that invest in the whole of the economy. And so really addressing the economy-wide issues is the goal here. And we broke it down into 4 key objectives. The first one is integrating physical risk and resilience into existing climate-related activities. So there's been a lot of work done over the past few years with investors understanding, okay, how is a decarbonising economy going to impact our portfolio and investments, and what does that mean? What we're wanting to see is that investors start to implement physical risk measurement and strategies into those processes that are already existing. The second objective is around a shared understanding, and this actually came up in one of the workshops that we ran with our investor members. And that's that investors, companies, governments, and communities all develop a shared understanding of physical climate risks. So, for example, a lot of the climate models didn't predict the Black Summer bushfires that we experienced. And the emissions impact of those bushfires was enormous. Not only the human cost and the economic cost of such a widespread disaster. So we know that these large catastrophic events actually do sit outside of a lot of the current modelling, which really means things likely to be worse than we expect. We've also already seen warming sort of happen at a faster rate than models have predicted. Another example is that the intensity of rainfall is happening at twice the rate that scientists expected. So what we're seeing is that actually across the economy, across people who are making decisions, allocating capital within companies, within society, and communities that need to respond, we actually need to get this shared understanding of what it is that we're facing so that we can properly prepare. And that comes to the third point, which is that investors need to step up and advocate for investable policy. Policy sets the preconditions under which investments are made, value is created, decisions are made at many different levels within an organization, within companies, again, within institutions. So that public policy needs to proactively address physical climate risks and then facilitate investment in adaptation and resilience. And that gets to the fourth point, which is, you might remember, as I said at the start, a lot of capital is going towards cleaning up. But as my grandmother used to say, a stitch in time saves nine. So we want to get a few more of those stitches in time, front-ending into the adaptation side. So that fourth point is really delivering that necessary private capital, because we know that the government can't pay for all this themselves. And we know that there is a benefit in investing upfront in adaptation and resilience. We just need to tweak the incentives to make sure that we're able to do that, because that outcome is we then reduce damage, disruption, and loss of value from climate change's physical impacts. So that's the overall target outcome and objectives. And I would encourage people to jump on our website and look for Road to Resilience, our physical risk strategy, to dig into more of the key results around what specific actions we think can help drive those outcomes.
We'll be sure to drop a link to the strategy into the show notes for this, Michael, because among other things, it was a well-written document as well. Enjoy is the wrong word, but it was a good document to read through.
Well, thank you very much. It was a big team effort, and shout out to Kate Simmons, who's IGCC's physical risk specialist, who had a very, very strong hand in the writing of it as well.
Excellent. So now you mentioned a few minutes ago, you were talking about the fact that you conducted workshops as part of the development of this strategy. What's been the IGCC membership-based reaction to both the development of this strategy and now this final document that's come out?
It's been very positive. As you mentioned, the strategy was launched at our annual summit just last week with the Assistant Minister for Climate Change, Senator Jenny McAllister, and our CEO, Beck McCullough-Wright. And look, the power of a strategy is that it's easy to understand and easy to remember and repeat and implement, right? So at the end of the day, does it work or not? And do we know whether it works or not? And oftentimes these big systemic problems, it can feel a bit overwhelming to know where to start. And that's really what we're trying to do with this strategy, is just break down where do you start. And so, by starting from, you've already got climate related processes, within your organization, have a meeting around, okay, what are we doing with physical risk? And again, lots of investors are already doing this. They're already going on the journey, but fewer have taken that big step into physical risk than we think is sort of necessary.
Mm.
Many are considering it. And so what we're trying to do is just give that prod and really clear the way to make it more simple for the advocates within organizations to get it on the agenda and start to help their organizations make those steps. And look, it can be challenging because there's already a lot happening in terms of just the decarbonisation piece, right? And these are small teams. People already have a lot of work on in their day to day. So the role that we play is trying to bring the people together to have that big conversation, get on the same page, glean those insights, and then summarize it hopefully in a really useful way that can then be shared amongst our investment community here.
You bring up a really good point that I want to hone in on, Michael. When it comes to mitigation and adaptation or decarbonization, is this an either or is this a yes and conversation?
I would see it as a yes and. It's two sides of the same coin. We need to radically reduce emissions as safely and as quickly as possible. But again, at the same time, there is a certain amount of warming and impacts that are locked in, and we need to prepare for those now.
I think the other thing that really stood out here, and I really want to salute you because you've been talking about this across a variety of platforms. The science is so heavy here, right? You're talking about disasters happening outside of models, impacts happening faster than scientists would have predicted. How have you dealt with this? How heavy the impact of climate future is, and I'd like to think a little bit about how we can sit with this sense of grief that a lot of us have, while also trying to take positive action. So, how have you dealt with how heavy this all is, Michael?
Good question. And that was what I suppose prompted this conversation as well. I shared on LinkedIn just a bit of my own personal story in the writing of the document, which, as I said, I've primarily looked at, okay, what's blocking decarbonisation and what do we do about that? And for this, I needed to dig back into the research and the literature. I was in Canberra during the Black Summer bushfires, living, breathing smoke for days and weeks on end, seeing the impact of that within my friends, and sort of, my brother, my network, having the mental toll from that. But what I found is that, facing up to the magnitude of the challenge did have a negative impact on my mental health. I started just breaking into tears at random times, like at the gym or going for a walk, and to the point where it blocked me from actually being able to sit down and do the work. So, I'm really grateful that, over the years I've developed a range of strategies for maintaining mental health and emotional resilience. And one of those is just simply seeking help. So I reached out to my team members. I told them that I was struggling. I handed bits of it over. I spoke to our employee assistance psychologist and was working through, is this something I just need to chunk the tasks down, or do I need it to step away and allow my nervous system to reset? And I decided that that was what I needed to do, which was, in a strategic process, you got things you need to get out the door at certain times, and there's, clearance and procedures and all that stuff. So, but I was really lucky to have just a great team that I could lean on and hand over work to and know that that was getting done. And particularly want to shout out my colleague, Beth Richards, who stepped in and really helped a lot during that time. And then I took some time off. I played putt-putt with my girlfriend. I went for a walk in the woods. I reconnected to nature near my home. And I allowed myself to grieve and be sad and to cry. And I think, particularly in culture today, there's still a bit of a hangover of tears as being seen as a weakness. But I would encourage people, particularly men out there, that you do need to connect with the feeling that does come up from confronting these tough issues and go through those feelings. And then once that sort of process had happened over a few days, and I needed to take close to a week off, I was able to come back, refocus on the task, get down, head down, bum up, and punch out the rest of the writing.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully something useful will come from that. But, it is a big challenge, and so many people who do work that they care about will at some point have that encounter with their own mental health in it. So, to summarize, look after yourself. Don't let it stop you from doing the work, but listen to your body, listen to what you need, take a step back so that then you can return to the fight. Sometimes you got to just go to the benches for a little bit and let your mates take over.
I think that's such a beautiful image that, within a community, and so many channels I'm pinging through my head that, I write about and talk about with people like you, psychosocial safety at work, optimism and positive. And I kind of wonder if a lot of the focus we do on mitigation and decarbonization and looking to the future and technology is a protective device that we put in place because we want to envisage the positive future that we're hopefully working towards without really dealing with the heavy stuff that's going on right now. It's sort of the flip side of, pushing so far forward that sometimes it's a way to sort of push the rest to the back.
Yeah. Look, we need both,
Yeah.
right? Because and part of the problem is a psychological problem that we all have around. It's not pleasant to think about bad things happening, and so we put it off. But we need to have a mature conversation about the realities that, some places in Australia are not going to be livable anymore. We've built houses in floodplains. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
We're still building houses. I went to an adaptation conference a few months ago as well. Places that developers were told would be uninsurable were then developed. People bought these properties and now can't get insurance because they're on floodplains. Like, we've got to stop doing these absolute no-brainer things and then work towards some of the more complex components of adapting.
Excellent. And so in the last few moments we have together, Michael, road to resilience, where to from here? What do you hope that this document now becomes?
Hopefully it's the start of a conversation for a lot of people and organizations. So I really appreciate you having me on today, Rachel, to talk about it. Our goal is really, these are the high level objectives we're going to be working towards at IGCC, playing our role, and also want to shout out to the process that Senator Jenny McAllister is working through in terms of the national risk assessment and the adaptation plan that will be coming off of that. The government is making really strong moves towards creating that shared understanding, but it is on all of us to contribute to that process and think about, how it works at the grassroots level as well as the treetops and all the way through the trunk. So that's really the thing that I would leave with your listeners is have a read of it, think about what parts of it apply to you personally and your organization. And if you're interested in having more conversations about it, please, feel free to reach out to myself or the team at IGCC.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Investor Group on Climate Change Advocacy Manager Michael Bones, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Greener Way.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thanks for listening to the Greener Way podcast. If you liked today's show, remember to rate and review us on your podcast platform and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Any feedback? Contact us on podcast@fssustainability.com.au. I'm Rachel Allen Backus.
The Greener Way podcast is a product of FS Sustainability, a show about people, the planet, and investing in our collective future. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The Greener Way podcast gives listeners access to information and educational content provided by discussing numerous financial sustainable options and our featured guests. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of The Greener Way are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. FS Sustainability operates under an Australian Financial Service License and the exemption made available under the Corporations Act 2001 in respect to any information or advice given. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the FS Sustainability website, fssustainability.com.au.